swing stage planning. And today we're going to go through swing stage planning and rescue. A lot of us use access equipment to do our work on various buildings. One of the things that I think that a lot of contractors fail to really think about is planning that access and planning for the worst case scenario. A lot of us get out there and we hope for the best, and we go through our day and hope that nothing happens that causes us to have to figure things out. As we get into pre-planning, JHAs, site-specific safety plans, it's important to note when we're working with access equipment that our rescue is very important to have a plan in place. Maybe that's the fire department, maybe that's self-rescue, and depending on your location, you may be forced into getting additional training or having additional resources allocated to that job site that you didn't plan on having when you were bidding the project. When we're talking about pre-planning, what we're really focused on is where the job is, what resources are available to us. Are those resources something that we can use, or is it something that we are going to have a hard time getting in the event of an emergency? I think that people who work with swing stages often think that, oh, well, you know, we're not large enough of a company to have an accident here. We only do.
Hello, Michael.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We often hear this statement of, well, we're only a small company. We do, minimal work. We don't do that much high work. But the simple fact is, it's all a game of numbers. If we have swing stages on buildings, eventually something will happen, and you will have to react to that. It may not be something major, but it's simple as somebody running motor through a knot on a wire rope, or inverting a swing stage, or improperly rigging the rooftop rig. These things can happen, and they've happened to many of us out there. Being prepared for that is really important. All of us who worked in major metropolitan cities, we probably have a fire department or rescue services that are available, and we use those services and kind of don't even think about them. It's just part of our plan.
I mean, it's not like that. I mean,
To have those resources there.
Yeah,
I mean, they have.
I think Rich
He knows it's coming.
Yeah.
Mike, this is Stace. Maybe we need to remind everyone to please mute themselves until the Q&A. It's not urgent now.
Okay, thank you. So there's really two different aspects of your rescue planning. You're looking at, where's my job site and what resources are available. And when we get that new job and we get out to site, the first thing we need to do is look at that. And that's not always an assumption. You actually need to contact the fire department. You need to contact those emergency services and make sure that they're available for you, because it may not be. A good example of this is in King County. There's only one Highline rescue team in King County that services all of Bellevue and the surrounding areas. And then there's one in Seattle, downtown Seattle core. That Highline rescue team for King County, which if we're working in Bellevue, could be all the way up in Skykomish, which is about an hour and a half drive, performing a rescue. And if that team is not available when we have an emergency on a job site, we need to have a plan B. We need to be able to react to the events and be able to perform a rescue without those resources being available to us. So that's what we're really discussing here. And some examples that we put together for you. There are plans and procedures that you guys can have in place as a company to kind of help with that and making sure that your workers in the field are trained properly and have the proper resources to execute a plan. So I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples. The first one I'm going to show you is this is a working at heights rescue plan for somebody that doesn't have their own rescue teams and doesn't have a rope access team on staff that can go out and perform rescues. This would be really working on a step-by-step process and going through each one of these boxes and looking at, okay, what am I doing? What kind of work am I doing? And we just check off these boxes and kind of go through. It also takes care of our training piece that we're required to do per OSHA for our fall protection site-specific plans by going through this with our employees and having them sign it. And again, it's just a yes/no question. You're asking, in the event of emergency, who are you contacting? Who are you reaching out to first? If you have a job site that you know is going to be a 45-minute lead time for fire and rescue to get there, are you going to contact fire and rescue first? Or are you going to contact your rescue team first? You're most likely going to contact your rescue team first and then contact fire and rescue, because your rescue team is going to be the first on site to respond, and you want to get them on the road as soon as possible. On another way, if you have an event and you're in a downtown core, you're probably going to contact fire and rescue first and then contact everyone else. And that's kind of the way it works. So just knowing those and making sure your guys out in the field know those and know what am I supposed to do? What is the procedure? What is the process to deal with this? What type of equipment do I need on site to perform this rescue if something happens? And can I access that piece of equipment through a deck or through a window? Is there a way to access it while we're on this drop? There may or may not be. So that's kind of the process. Talking about overhead protections and protecting the scene, and getting into suspension traumas and what all of this means. And then there's an explanation of each type of system for you to go through with your guys. And I can make this available to whoever would want a copy of it. And again, this is for a company that does not have a on-site rescue team. Next one I'm showing is one that a company would use that has on-site rescue. It has rope access technicians that are trained in rescue and have the abilities to perform those rescues. When working with rope access technicians, you have the ability within your company to perform very advanced rescues. And if you're working in a situation where you don't have, for example, if I'm working out in the middle of nowhere and I don't have a high angle rescue team for a fire department, I may need to get someone trained up to this level to be able to perform rescue and be on site. I may need to hire a contracted company that has those resources so that they can be on site while I'm performing work. So if something does happen, they're able to respond to it. Having that kind of planning is what will make a successful rescue happen. So this is one you'll see in here, types of rope grabs, types of harnesses, what are their procedures for performing a rescue. And then the last thing that I'm going to share with you guys in regards to procedures is rescue procedures. And every job site should have a set of this, a template like this on their job site. This is your emergency plan. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're telling your superintendents and foremen. This is what you need to do. If something happens on this job site, this is the document you go to and you follow the directions within this document. And it tells you, testing and training, we do this. This is how we do this. And then it gets into the rescues. So rescue procedures. A good example here, a rescue from an elevating work platform. So if an elevating work platform is available on site, the suspended worker can be reached from the platform follow the following procedure below. This makes it very simple for your workers out on site to know exactly what to do to perform a rescue. They don't need to wait for someone to get there. And that's important. The less time that we spend on the line or hanging from harnesses, the better off we are from having a worker have a permanent damage to their body from that fall. Okay. So before work begins, we always have to train workers on self and assisted rescue. And we need to provide the rescue equipment on site. That may be as simple as providing them with trauma straps and training, but on some sites we need to provide them with more than that. And if we have swing stages on site, there are ways to rig things to where you don't have to put rescuers out on site of the building. If you have a job site out in the middle of nowhere, then you can rig from the top and have lower from the top systems where you can lower equipment and lower workers. And we're going to show you more of that. I'm going to show you some systems that lower workers. And then Jim's going to show you guys some systems that you can lower your gear out, all of your gear out, without ever having someone exposed on the side of the building. Those systems are expensive, but if you're in a situation where you're on a building where rescue is not available, it is a good alternative to having rope access technicians on site. So we really have three scenarios that we're going to share with you. That scenario one is a swing collapse, and we have workers hanging from personal fall arrest systems, and we don't have local emergency services. There's a situation where we're working in a building. There's no high angle rescue team. We could be working on a structure, and we know that we don't have the fire department. So we follow our procedure, and we're going to contact local fire and make sure they know of the situation so they can dispatch the scene. But we're going to have to provide the access and the equipment to get our workers down from that building with whatever means possible. If you're in this situation, a lot of guys out there in the high angle world will tell you that you need to have a trained supervisor available at all times, that your level 3 technician that you have with your company should be available and mobile at all times. Never be riding with someone else in their vehicle or stuck on a job site where there is no way for them to leave due to the fact that you have swing stages up in the air. If you have something happen, that person acts more as if like a conductor. They get on site and they're kind of directing the operations for the rescue. They're telling people, hey, I need you to go do this. I need you to do this so that we can perform that rescue safely. The other way of performing rescues with this type of situations is doing a rig from top system. Now, this is expensive, but when you don't have your own rescue team and you don't have emergency services available, it is a good option. I have a little video here from Petzl that kind of shows what that looked like and what kind of systems you can use, and maybe you guys will benefit from that. So I'll bring that up here. Bring this video up.
If you're a Washington homeowner, 2022 is your last chance to go solar. In December,
Mike, is there supposed to be sound to the video?
No, there's not.
Okay.
So guys, what this is showing is a rig to lower system. We're actually currently using this on a few of our job sites. Most notably, we have a job site in Bellevue that is a very hard access. So we have set up with rig to lower systems. So if a situation happens where we have a worker suspended, we can lower them very quickly. So make sure. So that's kind of the idea behind rig to lower systems. You guys can use those when there is no emergency personnel available to provide a rescue on site. The second scenario that we're going to talk about is a swing collapse with workers in personal fall arrest systems again, but with local emergency services available. And this is where we go back to that pre-planning and pre-task planning that we have to have our procedure set in place. And again, contacting the right services and then making sure that we as a company have an understanding with all of our supervisors on site that when the emergency personnel arrive on site, that they're kind of directing the flow. They kind of take over everything and they're going to tell us what they need from us instead of us telling them what they need, what we need from them. And then they're going to provide rescue in that situation. The common goal that most companies have is to keep fire and EMS off their job sites. And you can do that if you have the trained workers, if you have, when you're in the swing stages, if you really pay attention and your workers are well trained on being able to provide self-rescue in most cases. If this does happen, we just want to be prepared for it. We want to have the right procedures in place, the right policies in place. We want to make sure that our workers out on site understand who to contact and what numbers to call when an emergency happens. It's not always 911, right? In some jurisdictions, you're going to call, for example, in Seattle, you don't call 911 in the event of a high angle rescue situation. You call the special operations team of the Seattle Fire Department. To get a quick response, if you call 911, you're going to go through dispatch and all kinds of stuff to get to who you need to talk to. If you have their number directly on the job site, you can contact the high angle team right away, get a hold of them, see where they're at, what their duration to job site is, and get that ball moving a lot faster to get the right people there. So just pre-planning and preparing for that. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jim and our scenario 3, which is a swing is disabled and the workers are on platform and inaccessible from buildings, interior, or decks. So, Mr. Jim.
Nicole, I'm getting an error message. It says host disabled, participant screen sharing.
You are good to go now.
All right,
Sorry,
thank
when
you.
you logged back in that last time, I forgot to reset it, so you should be good.
No problem. Am I showing my screen?
No.
Screen share.
There we go.
Okay. All right, the part of the presentation I'm going to do today is somewhat of a refresh of what I did in Salt Lake on rescuing equipment, but also just some things that you can think about during your pre-plan and maybe some products or some parts and pieces to your plan that you can add to make life a bit easier for you. In Salt Lake, we talked about a downswing stage that has an incapacitated motor on a building that has inoperable windows and basically a shear wall at the elevator bank where you can't get guys on and off the swing stage. This wasn't really a pre-planned job. This was a job that I got called into, one of my customers had in Atlantic City. Since then, it's become a part of my training and part of my pre-planning as I go forward. This day, I happened to be in Atlantic City and I happened to have a kit that I kept in my truck of miscellaneous parts and pieces that I use in the event of a down motor or down equipment. But it was something that wasn't really difficult to have and wasn't difficult to keep in my truck, but it made this situation much easier to use. And since I did the presentation in Salt Lake, I've had 3 or 4 different people call me asking me what parts and pieces I keep in my kit. And I think they're actually starting to utilize these, please keep them in their foreman's vehicles or back at the shop and keep it available. The key parts of what I used that day, the situation on that job was the swing had a problem with the motor that had a wire rope jam. Fortunately, they had an extra wire rope and an extra motor on site from another swing stage, but there were parts and pieces they didn't have to make the swing work or this rescue work really well. If my arrow is showing you right now, there's a bracket right here called a heavy duty tang or heavy duty motor mount, and a 20-foot truck strap is what I had to make this job work. It's something, if you guys keep this as a part of your plan, or you keep these parts and pieces in your truck or have someone have it, it'll make a scenario like this, which is not totally uncommon to have a motor either having an electronic issue or a mechanical issue based on just a mechanical failure or things that your guys do on the site that get inside the motor that cause problems. But if you look at the device we have right here, it allows you to basically take a motor, not have a permanent mount on the swing stage and attach it onto a strap. The 20-foot strap that we used that day worked out perfect for us. It just happened to be what I had in the truck. But what it allowed us to do, we lowered a motor down to the swing stage, lowered additional wire rope down to the swing stage, made our connection with the truck strap, that heavy duty tang on the bottom of the motor. And then what it allowed us to do was take the plug out of our original hoist, plug it into that hoist, use that hoist to lift up and take the load off the original down motor, lower the wire rope back down to the swing stage. And then we operated this motor as if it was the original motor. The other motor was in good shape and allowed the customer to bring the swing all the way down to the ground 46 stories without having to call fire rescue, without having to do any kind of a major plan. It took probably about 3.5 to 4 hours to actually accomplish this task, only because it hadn't been planned out ahead of time. And there were certain parts and pieces that we didn't have that we had to locate locally down in Atlantic City. But as a part of your plan, the more common issues you're going to most likely have, and I think if I had people's faces on their screen, I could see them nodding up and down, is motor issues, whether it be an electrical issue from feeding it with low voltage or a wire rope jam issue that causes these kind of problems. The fact that the swing wasn't vertical or was still vertical and it wasn't laying horizontal and it wasn't in a scenario where these people on the swing stage were any kind of a hazard. It was more of a take your time, figure it out, get the swing down to the ground. Had we called fire rescue and fire rescue came and took the people off the swing stage, we now would have had the problem of having a swing stage 46 stories up in the air with nobody on it, that you then had to then put people back onto the swing stage and still try to accomplish this task. So if part of your pre-planning process, when you know you're working on a portion of a building where 46 stories, the fire department is not going to get to it with a ladder truck. There's no operable windows. You're working on shear wall conditions where behind the glass would be a concrete wall for an elevator bank or an elevator bay. Being able to accomplish a rescue like this with timing and without a lot of specialized parts and pieces really makes a part of your rescue plan for your people and for your equipment work much easier. So that was the one we discussed in Salt Lake. The next thing we talked about was another one that I went over, but I'll give you just a quick scenario. Understanding the equipment that you're working on, whether it be Spiders equipment or Sky Climbers equipment or Tractails equipment, whatever you're using, each of those manufacturers have different nuances to their equipment that allow you to do certain things possibly in the air. Another scenario you would have with the same kind of motor would be you have an electrical fault inside the motor, you give it low voltage and you burn out a start capacitor or a run capacitor, wherever it may be. There are ways in the newer hoists that are out right now where everything's on a motherboard, which is contained on one single board. And with a little bit of training, if you had a scenario like this, and once again, where your swing is still level and your men are not in any kind of a hazard situation, they could be trained to take a motherboard out of another motor on the property, or you could bring a motherboard to them or another motor. Instead of having to lower a 130-pound motor 46 stories down on a piece of rope and have them do a major change out, it could be as simple as taking 4 screws out of the front of the motherboard, the motor, taking the front housing off, just connecting a few 6-pin connections, taking the motherboard out of the motor, swapping the second motherboard back in, putting it back together and going back to work. So it's not very common. It's a nice feature to have in some of the hoists that are out there these days. But once again, it doesn't involve rescue. It doesn't involve putting people on ropes. It doesn't involve people swinging a hammer and breaking a piece of glass and climbing into a building. And the people that are actually on the swing stage are comfortable on swing stages. They're trainable and have been trained in other operations you have them doing on the wall anyway. So this small portion of training is not difficult to bring them into speed and to give them a little more level of security and the level of training and knowledge that they can get themselves down in a scenario without having to involve helicopters and fire departments and police departments and everybody else in OSHA. So there's certain things that you can add as well. The next thing, when you're on suspended scaffolds, a lot of times you have other equipment in the area. If you had a problem with the swing right on the left-hand side or the right-hand side in this picture, or if you have 3 or 4 swing stages long on a wall, if you had motor issues, if you had people issues, you had health issues, whatever it may be, you can utilize the swing next to it to actually bring equipment up to do swap outs. I've seen in the past where people would take this one swing and lash it to the swing in the middle and allow it to come down depending on how far you're coming down as a part of your plans. But the rescue plan, a lot of people ask and a lot of get into deep into the woods and into the weeds on how they can accomplish a rescue. If you have a secondary piece of equipment in that same area or next to it, that can become your rescue plan for incapacitated workers, incapacitated equipment, whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be a long-winded plan. It can be, I'm going to use the swing that's next to it. I'm always going to have a swing next to the one I'm working out of. And we can use that swing as our rescue plan or as our secondary egress from the platform itself. The other scenarios you get into, which is a little bit more specialized, Mike mentioned it earlier about rigging from the top. This was a scenario where the building was 1,500 foot tall. So the weight of the platform, the wire ropes and the power cord would not allow the swing to go all the way to the rooftop in a temporary scenario and still maintain its overall load capacities. So we were working on the top 150 foot of this building, and we basically rigged the swing stage with primary motors that actually operate the swing up and down. And if for some reason the workers got down 150 foot or so, since they couldn't go all the way to the ground, we could use the motors that are hanging from the rigging devices up top and actually pull the entire swing stage and the workers back up as well. So if you're in scenarios where you going down isn't always the best thing for you, it's going down could be water. If you're working on bridges, going down could be obstructions or railroad tracks, whatever it may be. If you need the way to bring them back up in the situation where your motors fail or your people fail, you can actually double rig it where you have primary motor for operation of the swing and secondary motors rigged for rescue that you can use to actually accomplish your rescue task without a lot of planning after the fact. When you do all your pre-planning, there's really not a lot of scenarios that this would not affect the rescue in unless you completely lost power and then none of the motors would work. But up until that point, you could find a secondary source of electricity and utilize the two topside motors to do your rescue if you had to. We've done this a lot in industrial applications where you're putting people in 300-foot deep, 36-inch diameter tubes. There's a primary basket that they actually ride down in the tube, but we also have the secondary so that we can actually pull them up in case the person becomes incapacitated with gases, whatever may be in there, any kind of a hazardous environment. It allows you not to necessarily have that person being fully functional and actually allow the basket to bring itself and the man back up to keep itself safe. The other thing Mike was mentioning earlier about that rigging for rescue and rigging device here, the Petzl ID, the device he was showing, the yellow one or the red one I'm showing right here, it's a real nice device. What it basically does, it allows you, in today's world, most of us take our wire rope, throw it over the wall, run it down to the swing stage, and we anchor it onto a hard stop. And if it's a 200-foot drop, we have 220 foot of wire rope. We tie a knot at the top, and that's it. That doesn't allow you any kind of a lowering because you only have about 20 foot of rope up on the rooftop past your knot. So like Mike was showing there, if you, in this scenario here, instead of giving yourself a hard stop at a knot, you can run it through a lowering device or a Petzl ID as they're called. And then you would have another 200 foot of rope in a bag up on the rooftop. If for some reason the person fell out of the swing, if some reason a wire rope broke on the swing, whatever it may be, you could use that device. You could use this device right here, an edge roller, run the lifeline over the edge roller and down over the wall. And at that point, you could go back to your Petzl ID, actuate the brake, play out line, and it would play line out and lower the man down to the ground without having to put someone over the wall and go down for a rescue scenario. Or actually, you would have to, before you even had to call 911 or get 911 to get someone on location, you could actually use that device to put that into a part of your rescue plan or your work plan so that if something happened, you can lower the person down another floor to a window level they can get off at, or all the way down to the ground. And the photograph or the shots right over next to it right here, just basically, we do a lot of work in shafts up in New York City, fresh air shafts, duct work, whatever you might want to call it. You rig to a penetration in the floor, drop the motor down, and basically run your lifelines off of the two other Petzl or two other rigging devices here. So if something were to happen, you could lower them and everything back down to the ground as well. So that's about all I had to show you. It's just trying to make you think that there's not always one way to skin the cat. And there's different devices out there and there's different things you may have or you may utilize to make this work. But it's not always the best thing to call 911. You have a problem with the swing stage because you still have the problem with the swing stage. So if you can train your workers to do troubleshooting and to identify what the original issue is, you may be able to use them also to get the swing stage down to the ground and eliminate the hassle of having to get someone back onto that platform, get it down to the ground, and then go back to work. And it's going to cost you a lot more man hours if you have to go back into that scenario and pull that suspended scaffold back down without people on it to try to do it.
So the idea of our presentation today is bring light to pre-planning and the value of pre-planning when we're looking at swing stage in regards to rescue. And I hope that this helped you guys kind of have some different concepts and different views on how you're doing operations out in your field or what equipment you're using. If you guys have any questions or if you seen a piece of equipment that we showed here that you're interested in or would like to know more about, just reach out to Nicole or Jennifer. Most of you guys have my email. You can email me and I can send you some information on it. Technologies have changed, and that's just a simple fact. We've had technology has gotten better over the years. And that's when we've gotten into IDS, IDs, we've gotten into rig to lower, and we've gotten into using better, more stable, more reliable ropes. And that's what we're trying to kind of show the group. Nicole?
All right. Well, thank you, Mike and Jim. Does anyone have any questions? Since there is 62 of us on this call, why don't we do it this way? At the very bottom right of your screen, there's a smiley face that says reactions. If you hit that, there's a raise hand. So if you have a question, go ahead and hit that raised hand emoji, and then I'll call on you. All right. It looks like Carlos has a question. Carlos, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. For the davit rescue, when we're talking about rigging those hoists up onto the davit arm, is there a reference for how to do that safely? I mean, obviously we don't want to drop 100+ pounds or have that, falling objects hazard. Is there kind of a reference or any kind of materials that you guys would recommend on that?
It would be an engineered system that we'd work with you on. And it doesn't have to be a davit. It could also be a 5x5 beam on a gantry. It just has to be a rigging point that's going to support a 4-to-1 safety factor based on the load of the hoist. So yeah, there's really no standards per se or ANSI documentation on it. It's something we would work with you through our engineering group to make sure you have a site-specific drawing for that application. And just one other thing, not all hoists can be hung upside down and have the overspeed device work. Ours did not. We had to add a secondary rescue overspeed device into our hoist. And most of our competitors are the same way. So just because you saw it on the video today, don't think you can just go do it. You really need to talk to the manufacturer and make sure that their equipment will function in that direction.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Does anyone else have a question? That seems to be the only question I see. Oh, Stace.
Jim, I know what Mike does in Telegram, but can you explain a little bit more to the group about what you're seeing commercially available for 100% tool tie-off system in swings and what you're seeing with your customer base and what's commercially available for that?
There's more and more devices out there every day, from being able to put a screw gun and a hammer and a sledgehammer and chipping guns. We don't supply lanyarded type equipment, but there's plenty of it out there in the market to make it work. I mean, most of what you put on a swing stage now, you can tie off. And there's even been points where we had to put fishing line on our nuts and our bolts to actually do installation over top of areas where they could not have anything dropped. So there's always a way to tie it off. The commercially available ones are a lot easier, but you can always reinvent the wheel sometimes to tie things off just so that there's no way you can drop stuff.
And are you seeing a majority of your customers with a 100% tool tie-off system, or is it still a mix?
It's still a mix. A lot of time it's the building owner or the general contractor that requires it. Some guys are going to it on their own, but some of the contractors are going kick and screaming as well.
All right. Anyone else? All right. It looks like.
Actually, I have another one, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, Nicole.
No, you're fine.
Jim, with that motherboard, could you use the PC1 on the Spider?
Now, the SC1000 has its own integrated motherboard. I don't think the PC1 has an integrated motherboard yet. That's an older technology motor. I know the SC1000, when it came out, that was a part of the original design. And I think Sky Climber, one of their motors, does have a motherboard. I don't think it's four bolts and 3 pin connections, but I think there is an option one way or another. I'm just not sure which hoist that is.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? All right. And just a reminder of what I said at the beginning of the call. This session was recorded, so I will send out the recorded link tomorrow to all of membership. And then if your company plans to participate in the stand down, just be sure to register on swionline.org/stand down. All right. Well, thank you again, Mike and Jim, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks.
All right. Have a
Thanks,
good
guys.
afternoon.
You guys.
Appreciate it.